As a bank manager with 23 years of experience at First National Trust, I thought I'd seen every possible way customers could lose money: identity theft, phishing scams, unauthorized wire transfers. I'd handled them all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered about a seemingly innocent ATM setting that could drain your entire account without you even knowing it. It will change how you use every ATM for the rest of your life. It started on a Tuesday morning in November, the kind of gray, drizzling day that makes even the most optimistic person want to crawl back into bed. I was reviewing the previous day's transaction reports when something caught my eye, a pattern so subtle that most people would have missed it entirely. Several customers had reported mysterious withdrawals from their accounts, but these weren't typical fraud cases. The withdrawals were happening at our own ATMs, using the customer's own cards with their correct PINs entered. The first case involved Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, an 82-year-old retired librarian who had banked with us for over 40 years. She came into my office that morning, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse, her usually pristine silver hair slightly disheveled. Eleanor had always been meticulous about her finances, the type of customer who balanced her checkbook to the penny and kept every receipt in a shoebox organized by month. She said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think someone is stealing from me, but I can't understand how. I went to the ATM yesterday to withdraw $40 for groceries, and somehow $300 came out of my account. The machine said I requested it, but I swear I only pressed the $40 option." I pulled up Eleanor's account on my computer, and sure enough, there it was. A withdrawal for $300 at 2:47 p.m. the previous day from our downtown branch ATM. The transaction showed all the correct authentication. Her card, her PIN, even the timestamp matched when she said she was there. But Eleanor was adamant she had only requested $40. "Mrs. Hartwell," I said gently, "I'm going to look into this personally. Can you walk me through exactly what happened when you used the ATM?" Eleanor's eyes grew distant as she recounted the events. I inserted my card like always, entered my PIN, and selected Fast Cash. I always use the $40 option because it's convenient. But then the machine made some strange beeping sounds, more than usual. The screen flickered a bit, and suddenly it was dispensing more money than I expected. I thought maybe I had pressed the wrong button by mistake, so I took the money and left. It wasn't until I got home and counted it that I realized there was $300 instead of $40. This struck me as odd because our ATM systems are designed to be foolproof. The Fast Cash feature has preset amounts, and customers simply press the corresponding button. There's no way to accidentally select $300 when trying to get $40 unless something was seriously wrong with the machine, or Eleanor was mistaken about which button she pressed. "Did you notice anything unusual about the ATM itself?" I asked. "Any stickers, loose parts, or anything that looked different?" Eleanor shook her head. "It looked normal to me, but you know, my eyesight isn't what it used to be." I might have missed something. I assured Eleanor that we would investigate thoroughly and restore any incorrectly withdrawn funds to her account. But as I walked her to the door, a nagging feeling told me this wasn't a simple case of user error or a malfunctioning machine. Something more sinister was at play. That afternoon, I received another call from our customer service department. James Morrison, a 34-year-old software engineer, was reporting a similar incident. He had attempted to withdraw $60 from the same downtown ATM that Eleanor had used, but ended up with $400 being debited from his account. "This is impossible," James insisted when I called him back personally. "I'm in tech. I know how these systems work. I selected $60, confirmed it on the screen, entered my PIN correctly, and the next thing I know, $400 is gone from my checking account. Your ATM is either hacked or seriously malfunctioned." I scheduled an immediate inspection of the downtown ATM and asked our head technician, Roberto Valdez, to meet me there. Roberto had been maintaining our ATM network for over 15 years and knew every bolt and circuit board in these machines. If anyone could find what was wrong, it would be him. The downtown branch ATM was located in a high-traffic area, nestled between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. As Roberto and I approached the machine, nothing appeared unusual from the outside. The familiar blue and silver casing looked pristine, the screen was clear, and all the buttons were properly aligned. But Roberto immediately began his systematic examination, running his hands along the edges, checking for any signs of tampering. "Margaret, come look at this," Roberto called out after about 10 minutes of inspection. He was kneeling beside the machine, pointing to a small device attached to the underside of the cash dispensing slot. It was barely visible, about the size of a USB drive, and perfectly color-matched to the ATM's casing. "What is it?" I asked, crouching down to get a better look. "I've never seen anything like this before," Roberto admitted, carefully removing the device with a pair of pliers. "It's connected to the machine's internal wiring, but it's not part of the original design. Someone installed this after the fact." The device was sophisticated, with tiny LED lights and what appeared to be a small antenna. Roberto photographed it from every angle before placing it in an evidence bag. We immediately shut down the ATM and called our corporate security team, as well as the local police. Detective Sarah Williams arrived within an hour, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who specialized in financial crimes. She examined the device with the same intensity that Roberto had, but even she was puzzled by its purpose and design. "We'll need to get this to our forensics lab," she said, "but based on the sophistication of this thing, we're looking at something far more advanced than typical ATM skimmers. Those usually just steal card information. This device was actually interfaced with the machine's internal systems." Over the next few days, while we waited for the forensic analysis, more customers began reporting similar incidents. All of them had used ATMs at various branches throughout the city, and all of them had experienced the same phenomenon. They selected one withdrawal amount, but a much larger sum was debited from their accounts. The pattern was becoming clear, but the mechanism remained a mystery. Then Roberto made a discovery that sent chills down my spine. During a routine inspection of our Maple Street branch ATM, he found another device, this one even smaller and more cunningly concealed. It was hidden inside the card reader slot, invisible to customers, but perfectly positioned to interact with the machine's programming. "Margaret," Roberto said when he called me that evening, "I think I'm starting to understand what these things do, and it's terrifying. I think someone has found a way to hack into our ATM's fast cash settings." The next morning, Roberto explained his theory. The fast cash feature on most ATMs allows customers to quickly select common withdrawal amounts, $20, $40, $60, $80, $100, and sometimes $200, without having to manually enter the amount. These preset values are stored in the ATM's memory and can be modified by technicians during maintenance. "What if," Roberto said, "someone figured out how to remotely alter these preset values? So when a customer thinks they're selecting $40, the machine is actually programmed to dispense and charge them for $300. The more I thought about it, the more horrifying the implications became. Customers would use the fast cash feature thinking they were withdrawing small amounts, but the hidden devices were secretly reprogramming the ATM to charge them much larger sums. The beauty of the scam, from a criminal's perspective, was that it would leave no obvious trace. The transactions would show up as legitimate withdrawals using the customer's own card and PIN. I immediately contacted our IT security team and requested that they examine the software on every ATM in our network. What they found confirmed Roberto's worst fears. 12 of our 53 ATMs had been compromised, each one infected with malicious code that periodically altered the fast cash preset values. The forensics report on the first device came back 2 days later, and Detective Williams called me with the results. "Margaret, this is unlike anything we've seen before. The device contains a miniaturized computer with wireless capabilities. It can receive remote commands to modify the ATM's programming and then transmit confirmation back to whoever is controlling it." "So someone could be sitting miles away, watching customers use our ATMs and selectively targeting them for larger withdrawals?" I asked. "Exactly. And here's the really scary part. The device logs every transaction. Whoever is behind this has detailed records of every customer who used these compromised machines, including their withdrawal patterns, account balances, and timing habits." The investigation expanded rapidly. The FBI was called in, and we discovered that this wasn't just happening at our bank. Similar devices had been found at ATMs belonging to 4 other financial institutions across 3 states. The perpetrators had developed a sophisticated network of compromised machines, potentially affecting thousands of customers. As the scope of the criminal operation became clear, I realized I had to warn people about more than just this specific scam. There was something fundamentally dangerous about how trusting we had all become with ATM technology. We inserted our cards, entered our PINs, and trusted that the machines would do exactly what we asked them to do. But what if they didn't? 3 weeks into the investigation, we caught our first break. One of the compromised ATMs at a shopping mall had been under video surveillance, and the security footage showed a man installing one of the devices. He was well-dressed, carried what appeared to be a legitimate technician's toolbox, and worked with the confidence of someone who belonged there. But he wasn't one of our authorized maintenance personnel. Detective Williams showed me the surveillance footage, and I studied the man's face carefully. He appeared to be in his 30s, average height and build, with dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Most notably, he wore a badge that looked exactly like the ones our legitimate technicians used. "He's been watching our maintenance schedules," Detective Williams explained. "These installations always happened within a few days after legitimate maintenance visits. He probably observed our real technicians to learn their routines, then came back later to install the devices." The FBI traced the wireless signals from the devices to a rented warehouse on the outskirts of the city. When they raided the location, they found a sophisticated operation that looked more like a technology startup than a criminal enterprise. Banks of computers monitored ATM networks across multiple states, tracking transactions in real time and remotely adjusting withdrawal amounts to maximize profits while avoiding detection. The mastermind behind the operation was Dr. Kevin Marsh, a former ATM software engineer who had been fired from a major manufacturer 3 years earlier for attempting to install unauthorized diagnostic software on production machines. Marsh had used his insider knowledge of ATM systems to develop the devices and recruit a network of accomplices who installed them across the region. During his interrogation, Marsh revealed the true scope of the operation. Over 18 months, they had stolen over $2 million from unsuspecting customers. The genius of their approach was its subtlety. Instead of stealing large amounts from individual accounts, they skimmed smaller amounts from thousands of transactions, making it less likely that customers would notice or report the discrepancies immediately. "Most people don't check their ATM receipts carefully," Marsh told investigators with disturbing pride. "They request $40, get charged for $160, and don't realize it until they check their statement days or weeks later. By then, they assume they made a mistake or forgot about another transaction." But the most chilling revelation came when Marsh explained how they selected their targets. The devices didn't just randomly increase withdrawal amounts, they analyzed customer behavior patterns to identify the most vulnerable victims. Elderly customers who used the same ATM at regular intervals, young adults who frequently made small withdrawals for daily expenses, and busy professionals who rarely checked their receipts were all specifically targeted for larger theft amounts. "The system was learning," Detective Williams explained to me after the interrogation. Every transaction provided more data about customer habits, making the theft more precise and harder to detect over time. As the investigation concluded and the perpetrators were arrested, I found myself unable to shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The technology that enabled this crime was relatively simple, and Marsh's methods could easily be replicated by other criminals with similar knowledge. I began researching ATM security more deeply and discovered vulnerabilities that kept me awake at night. The fast cash feature that had been exploited in our case was just one of many potential attack vectors. A TMS could potentially be programmed to dispense incorrect amounts, charge fees for transactions that never occurred, or even distribute counterfeit bills while debiting accounts for legitimate currency. More disturbing was what I learned about the ATM manufacturing industry. Many machines used outdated software that was difficult to update, and security patches were often applied slowly or incompletely. The economic pressure to keep ATMs operational meant that banks frequently delayed security upgrades, leaving customers vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated attacks. I started paying attention to other unusual transaction patterns in our system and found evidence of additional manipulation attempts. Someone had been systematically testing different approaches to compromise our machines, probing for weaknesses that could be exploited. The fast cash manipulation was apparently just the most successful of several different attack methods being tried. During one late evening review of transaction logs, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Several customers had reported receiving bonus money from ATMs, situations where they had requested specific amounts but received more cash than expected, with their accounts being charged the correct amount. At first, this seemed like good luck for those customers, but I realized it was actually a test run for the reverse scam. The criminals had been experimenting with the system, first giving customers more money than expected to see if the transactions would be reported or noticed. When they confirmed that most people didn't immediately report these favorable errors, they switched to the opposite approach, charging customers more than they received. This discovery led me to examine ATM transaction patterns across the entire banking industry, and what I found was deeply disturbing. Similar unexplained discrepancies were occurring at banks nationwide, but they were being dismissed as isolated glitches or customer errors. The scope of ATM-based fraud was likely far larger than anyone realized. I began to understand that the real danger wasn't just the specific devices that had been installed at our machines. The fundamental problem was that ATM technology had become so complex that even bank employees like myself didn't fully understand how these systems could be manipulated. We trusted that the machines would function as designed, but we had no way to verify that the programming hadn't been altered. The investigation also revealed how the criminals had been able to access our maintenance schedules and technical documentation. Marsh had maintained contacts within ATM manufacturer companies and had purchased inside information about machine vulnerabilities and update schedules. This network of corrupt employees provided ongoing intelligence about the best times and methods to compromise different ATM models. As I delved deeper into the world of ATM security, I learned about other attack methods that were being used by criminals worldwide. Some thieves installed cash trapping devices that captured dispensed bills while still charging customers' accounts. Others used electromagnetic pulse generators to force ATMs to dispense their entire cash reserves. The most sophisticated criminals had developed malware that could be installed on ATMs through USB ports or network connections, giving them complete control over machine functions. The psychological impact of the investigation began to weigh on me heavily. Every time I used an ATM, I found myself scrutinizing every detail, looking for unusual attachments, checking that buttons felt normal, comparing receipt amounts to what I had requested. The simple act of withdrawing cash had become an exercise in paranoia. But my paranoia was justified. 3 months after the initial arrest, we discovered another compromised ATM at our suburban branch. This one used a different approach. Instead of modifying fast cash amounts, it randomly added service fees to transactions, charging customers between $5 and $15 extra for each withdrawal. The fees were listed on receipts as convenience charges or network access fees, making them appear legitimate. The discovery of this second-generation attack made me realize that we were dealing with an evolving threat. As security measures improved to counter one type of attack, criminals adapted and developed new methods. The ATM ecosystem had become an ongoing battlefield between security professionals and increasingly sophisticated thieves. I began to document every unusual transaction pattern I encountered, building a database of potential fraud indicators that other bank managers could use to identify compromised machines. The patterns were often subtle: slight increases in customer complaints about incorrect charges, unusual spikes in fee-based transactions, or discrepancies between cash dispensed and amounts charged. During this process, I discovered that many banks were reluctant to publicize ATM security vulnerabilities, fearing that awareness of these issues would reduce customer confidence. This silence created an environment where criminals could exploit the same vulnerabilities across multiple institutions without being detected quickly. The investigation had also revealed the international scope of ATM fraud. The devices used in our case had been manufactured in Eastern Europe and shipped through a network of shell companies designed to obscure their origin. Similar devices were being used to target ATMs across North America, Europe, and Asia, suggesting a coordinated global effort to exploit these vulnerabilities. Dr. Marsh, during his sentencing hearing, made a statement that haunts me to this day. ATMs are just computers connected to bank accounts, he said. As long as banks prioritize convenience over security, these machines will remain vulnerable to anyone with sufficient technical knowledge and criminal intent. The judge sentenced Marsh to 12 years in federal prison, but I knew that his arrest wouldn't stop other criminals from attempting similar schemes. The technical knowledge required to compromise ATMs was spreading through criminal networks, and the financial incentives were too large to ignore. In the months following the case, I worked with law enforcement and other banking professionals to develop new security protocols for ATM networks. We implemented more frequent security audits, improved monitoring systems for unusual transaction patterns, and established better communication channels between financial institutions to share threat intelligence. But despite these improvements, I remained deeply concerned about the broader implications of what we had discovered. ATM technology was becoming more complex and connected, with many machines now offering expanded services like loan applications, investment account access, and money transfers. Each new feature represented a potential attack vector for criminals who understood these systems better than the customers using them. The investigation had also highlighted the vulnerability of elderly customers like Eleanor Hartwell. Many older adults had grown up in an era when banking was conducted face-to-face with trusted tellers, and they often struggled to recognize when digital systems had been compromised. Criminals specifically targeted these customers because they were less likely to immediately notice or report discrepancies. I started conducting community education sessions about ATM security, teaching customers how to identify potential signs of tampering and encouraging them to carefully review all transaction receipts. But I realized that placing the burden of security awareness on customers was fundamentally unfair. People should be able to trust that their bank systems were secure without becoming cybersecurity experts themselves. The case had also exposed regulatory gaps in ATM oversight. While banks were required to report certain types of fraud to government agencies, there were no specific requirements for reporting ATM tampering incidents. This meant that the true scope of ATM-based fraud was largely invisible to regulators and law enforcement until individual cases like ours became too large to ignore. As I reflect on the entire experience now, what disturbs me most is how easily this crime could have continued undetected. If Eleanor Hartwell hadn't been so meticulous about her finances, if James Morrison hadn't been technically savvy enough to insist that something was wrong, the theft might have continued for years, affecting thousands of additional customers. The criminals had been incredibly careful to avoid taking amounts that would trigger automatic fraud detection systems. They studied banking regulations and knew that most automatic alerts were triggered by transactions over certain thresholds or unusual spending patterns. By stealing moderate amounts from many different customers, they stayed below these detection thresholds. The psychological profiles of the victims also revealed disturbing patterns. The criminals had specifically targeted customers who were unlikely to immediately notice or report discrepancies. People who made frequent ATM transactions, had multiple accounts with regular activity, or were dealing with personal or financial stress that might distract them from carefully monitoring their accounts. During victim interviews, we discovered that many people had noticed discrepancies, but had initially blamed themselves, assuming they had made mistakes or forgotten about transactions. This self-doubt was exactly what the criminals were counting on, and it delayed detection of the scheme by months. The technology used in the attack was also far more sophisticated than typical ATM fraud devices. Instead of simply stealing card information like traditional skimmers, these devices actually interfaced with the ATM's internal computer systems, requiring detailed knowledge of machine programming and network protocols. What made the scheme particularly insidious was its use of the fast cash feature, which was designed to make banking more convenient for customers. By exploiting a feature that people trusted and used regularly, the criminals turned convenience into vulnerability. The investigation revealed that the criminals had spent over 2 years planning and testing their approach before implementing the full-scale theft operation. They had studied ATM locations, customer traffic patterns, maintenance schedules, and bank security procedures with the thoroughness of legitimate business analysts. They had also recruited accomplices with specific technical skills, electronics experts who could manufacture the devices, software engineers who could develop the malicious code, and social engineers who could gather intelligence about bank operations. The criminal organization operated more like a technology company than a traditional theft ring. The financial impact on victims varied widely, but the emotional toll was universal. Customers felt violated and betrayed, not just by the criminals, but by the banking system that had failed to protect them. Many expressed feeling helpless and worried about using any ATM in the future. Eleanor Hartwell, despite having her money restored, never used another ATM. She returned to conducting all her banking transactions inside branch offices with human tellers, saying she could no longer trust machines to handle her money accurately. Her response was understandable but tragic. The criminals had stolen not just money, but also her confidence in the banking systems she had relied on for decades. The case also highlighted the global nature of modern financial crime. The criminals had used international supply chains to obtain components, offshore banking to launder proceeds, and encrypted communications to coordinate their activities across multiple states. Traditional law enforcement approaches were not well equipped to handle such sophisticated, distributed criminal operations. As I continued investigating ATM security vulnerabilities, I discovered that the fast cash manipulation was just one of many potential attack methods. Criminals could potentially alter exchange rates on machines that dispensed foreign currency, modify interest calculations on machines that offered instant loans, or manipulate account balance displays to encourage larger withdrawals. The more I learned about ATM technology, the more I realized how dependent the entire system was on trust and assumptions. Banks trusted that machines would operate as programmed, customers trusted that their transactions would be processed accurately, and regulators trusted that existing security measures were sufficient. But this case had shattered those assumptions. It demonstrated that determined criminals with sufficient technical knowledge could manipulate ATM systems in ways that were virtually undetectable without sophisticated monitoring and analysis. The experience changed my approach to banking security fundamentally. I began viewing every system and procedure through the lens of potential criminal exploitation, asking not just how things were supposed to work, but how they could be manipulated or subverted. This perspective led me to identify numerous additional vulnerabilities in our bank's operations, weak points in our network security, gaps in our transaction monitoring systems, and procedural loopholes that could be exploited by criminals with inside knowledge of banking operations. The investigation had also revealed the importance of cross-institutional cooperation in fighting financial crime. The criminals had targeted multiple banks simultaneously, but each institution had initially investigated independently, missing the broader pattern until law enforcement coordinated information sharing. As news of the case spread through banking industry publications, I was contacted by managers from dozens of other financial institutions who had experienced similar unexplained transaction discrepancies. Many had dismissed these incidents as isolated glitches, but our investigation provided a framework for understanding them as potential evidence of systematic criminal exploitation. The case ultimately led to significant changes in ATM security standards across the banking industry. Manufacturers were required to implement stronger authentication protocols for software updates, banks established more frequent security audits, and regulators mandated better reporting requirements for ATM-related fraud incidents. But despite these improvements, I remain concerned about the ongoing evolution of ATM-based crime. As security measures improve, criminals adapt and develop new attack methods. The fundamental challenge is that ATM networks represent a massive, distributed system with thousands of individual machines, each representing a potential point of vulnerability. The criminals in our case had demonstrated that given sufficient time, resources, and technical expertise, even sophisticated security systems could be compromised. This reality has profound implications not just for banking, but for all industries that rely on automated systems to handle financial transactions. The psychological impact of the case extended beyond individual victims to affect entire communities' relationship with banking technology. Local news coverage of the investigation led to temporary decreases in ATM usage as customers became more wary of using automated systems for financial transactions. This wariness was both understandable and problematic. While increased security awareness was beneficial, excessive fear of technology could push people toward less secure alternatives, like carrying large amounts of cash or using unregulated financial services. The case also highlighted generational differences in responses to technological crime. Younger customers who had grown up with digital technology were generally more willing to continue using ATMs after implementing additional security precautions, while older customers like Eleanor were more likely to abandon automated systems entirely. These generational differences created challenges for banks trying to balance security with accessibility. Enhanced security measures that might reassure tech-savvy customers could make banking more difficult for elderly or less technically sophisticated clients. The investigation had also revealed the economic incentives that made ATM fraud attractive to criminals. The potential profits were enormous. Our case involved over $2 million in theft over 18 months, while the risks of detection and prosecution were relatively low compared to other forms of financial crime. This risk-reward calculation meant that even successful prosecutions, like Dr. Marsh's case, might not deter other criminals from attempting similar schemes. The technical knowledge required was becoming more widespread, and the potential profits continued to attract sophisticated criminal organizations. The international nature of the criminal supply chain also made law enforcement more difficult. Components for the devices were manufactured in countries with limited law enforcement cooperation, making it difficult to disrupt the criminal infrastructure at its source. As I worked with federal investigators to understand the broader criminal network, I learned about similar operations targeting ATMs in Europe, Asia, and South America. The techniques and technologies were being shared through criminal networks, allowing successful attack methods to spread rapidly across international borders. The case had also demonstrated the limitations of existing banking security systems. Most fraud detection algorithms were designed to identify unusual spending patterns or transactions from unfamiliar locations, but they were not equipped to detect subtle manipulations of transaction amounts at familiar machines. This blind spot existed because banks had assumed that ATM hardware and software were inherently secure, focusing their security efforts on detecting fraudulent use of compromised account information rather than manipulation of the machines themselves. The investigation had forced our bank and others in the industry to fundamentally reconsider these assumptions and develop new monitoring systems capable of detecting the subtle signs of machine compromise. But developing these systems was expensive and technically challenging, requiring banks to invest heavily in cybersecurity infrastructure and expertise that many institutions were reluctant to fund adequately. The case also highlighted the importance of employee training in recognizing and responding to potential security threats. Roberto's careful inspection of our ATMs had been crucial to discovering the criminal devices, but not all banks had technicians with his level of experience and attention to detail. Many financial institutions relied on third-party contractors for ATM maintenance, creating additional security risks if these contractors were not properly vetted or trained to recognize signs of criminal tampering. The investigation had revealed that the criminals had specifically targeted banks and ATM networks that used certain contractors, suggesting that they had intelligence about which maintenance companies had weaker security protocols. This discovery led to industry-wide improvements in contractor vetting and training, but it also highlighted how criminal organizations were conducting sophisticated intelligence-gathering operations to identify vulnerable targets. The case ultimately became a turning point in how the banking industry approached ATM security, but it also served as a stark reminder of the ongoing cat-and-mouse game between financial institutions and increasingly sophisticated criminals. As I write this account, new forms of ATM-based crime continue to emerge. Criminals are developing more advanced devices, more subtle attack methods, and more sophisticated ways of avoiding detection. The battle for ATM security is far from over. What happened to our bank and our customers was a wake-up call that forced the entire financial services industry to confront uncomfortable truths about the vulnerabilities in systems that millions of people rely on every day. The fast cash feature that was exploited in our case was designed to make banking more convenient. But convenience without security is ultimately an illusion. The customers who were victimized in this case trusted that their bank would protect their money and that our systems would function as advertised. That trust was betrayed not through any negligence on our part, but because we were facing a threat that we had never encountered before and were not prepared to defend against. Eleanor Hartwell, James Morrison, and the dozens of other customers who were affected by this crime deserved better from the banking system that they had trusted with their financial security. Their experience serves as a powerful reminder that in our rush to embrace technological convenience, we must never lose sight of the fundamental responsibility to protect the people who depend on these systems. As a bank manager, I'm shocked that such a simple ATM setting could be exploited to drain customer accounts. But I'm also determined that awareness of these vulnerabilities will lead to stronger protections for everyone who relies on automated banking systems. The criminals who perpetrated this scheme were eventually caught and prosecuted, but the techniques they developed will likely inspire other criminal organizations for years to come. The only defense against this ongoing threat is constant vigilance, continuous improvement of security systems, and a commitment to putting customer protection above convenience or profit. The story I've told you is not just about one criminal scheme or one compromised ATM setting. It's about the fundamental challenge of maintaining security and trust in an increasingly complex and connected financial system. Every time you use an ATM, you're placing your trust in a network of hardware, software, and human systems that must all function correctly to protect your money. That trust is not misplaced, but it should not be blind. The criminals who targeted our banks succeeded because they understood our systems better than we understood the threats against them. Moving forward, all of us, banks, customers, regulators, and technology providers, must work together to ensure that the convenience of automated banking never comes at the cost of security. The ATM setting that could drain your account was hidden in plain sight, exploiting the trust that makes modern banking possible. By sharing this story, I hope to help ensure that no other customer experiences what Eleanor, James, and our other victims went through. Their ordeal serves as a stark reminder that in the digital age, security is not a feature that can be added as an afterthought. It must be built into the foundation of every system that handles people's money. As technology continues to evolve and banking becomes increasingly automated, new vulnerabilities will inevitably emerge. The only way to stay ahead of criminals who seek to exploit these vulnerabilities is through constant vigilance, ongoing education, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the customers who place their trust in our financial institutions. The story of this ATM setting is far from over. It's an ongoing reminder that in the battle between security and criminal innovation, the price of safety is eternal vigilance. Every transaction, every system update, and every new feature must be evaluated not just for its convenience or efficiency, but for its potential to be exploited by those who would steal from innocent customers. This is the reality of modern banking security, and it's a responsibility that every financial institution must take seriously. The cost of failure is not just measured in dollars stolen, but in the trust and confidence that forms the foundation of our entire financial system.